On the 22nd of June 1941, under the pale light of a summer dawn, the largest land invasion in the history of human warfare was unleashed. This was Operation Barbarossa. More than an attack, it was a crusade. The violent culmination of Adolf Hitler's obsession with destroying what he saw as his ultimate foe, the sprawling, enigmatic Soviet Union. A tidal wave of 3.88 million Axis soldiers, supported by thousands of tanks and aircraft, surged across a 1,000 front. Their mission, dictated by the Führer himself, was breathtaking in its arrogance: to conquer a nation spanning 11 time zones and bring it to its knees in just 5 months. The Red Army was caught in a state of strategic shock. Stalin had dismissed repeated warnings from his own intelligence, convinced Hitler would not dare to strike. The Soviet officer corps, already hollowed out and terrorized by Stalin's murderous political purges of the late 1930s, was paralyzed by indecision. As a result, the initial German assault was not a battle. It was a slaughter. The Luftwaffe obliterated the Soviet Air Force on the ground, and panzer divisions, the iron spearheads of the German Blitzkrieg, sliced through the disorganized Soviet defenses with terrifying ease. The German war machine, a three-headed dragon of immense power, drove deep into Soviet territory. In the north, Army Group North, under Field Marshal von Lieb, set its sights on Leningrad, the cradle of the Bolshevik Revolution. In the south, Army Group South, commanded by the veteran Field Marshal von Rundstedt, tore through the vast fertile plains of Ukraine, the breadbasket of the Union. And in the center, the most powerful of the three, Field Marshal von Bach Army Group Center, had one singular overwhelming objective: to capture Moscow, the political, logistical, and spiritual heart of the Soviet state. Within weeks, the German advance was measured not in miles, but in entire countries. On July 17th, after weeks of brutal fighting, von Bach's forces captured Smolensk, a historic city known as the Key to Moscow. The last major obstacle on the road to the capital was gone. Across the world, military analysts and politicians alike held their breath. From London to Washington, the consensus was grim. The Soviet Union was finished. Stalin, finally shaken from his state of denial, faced an almost hopeless situation. On paper, he had nearly 1 million men to defend the capital, but the reality was catastrophic. Of his 83 available divisions, a mere 25 were combat effective. The rest were shattered remnants, demoralized, and desperately short of equipment. It was against this army of ghosts that the Germans prepared to launch their final assault. On the 30th of September 1941, Operation Typhoon was initiated. It was a name that promised a storm, and a storm is what it delivered. The German plan was a masterpiece of encirclement, designed to trap and annihilate the remaining Soviet forces before they could retreat to the capital's defenses. At Bryansk, 2 entire Soviet armies were caught in a pincer. To the north at Vyazma, the jaws of the 3rd and 4th Panzer armies snapped shut in a colossal maneuver, trapping another 4 armies. The first line of Moscow's defense hadn't just been breached, it had ceased to exist. In these pockets alone, over 660,000 Soviet soldiers were captured, bringing the total number of prisoners taken since June to a staggering, almost incomprehensible 3 million men. The road to Moscow now lay wide open. Stalin was left with a skeleton force of perhaps 90,000 exhausted men and fewer than 150 tanks to defend a city of millions. By October 13th, the lead elements of German panzer groups were a mere 87 mi from the Kremlin spires. Panic. A cold and suffocating fog descended upon the city. The Soviet government began a frantic evacuation of key industries and officials. Martial law was declared. The city was being turned into a fortress, but it was a fortress with no army. But just as German victory seemed inevitable, the Russian landscape itself rose in defiance. An ancient and undefeated general took command. General Mud, the autumn rains, the dreaded Rasputita began. The unpaved roads of the Soviet Union, never designed for heavy mechanized traffic, dissolved into a vast, churning sea of impassable mud. German tanks, with their famously narrow tracks designed for the firm roads of Western Europe, sank up to their turrets. Supply trucks, the lifeblood of the offensive, became hopelessly mired, sometimes advancing only a few miles a day. The Blitzkrieg, a strategy utterly dependent on speed, was literally stuck in the mud. Reluctantly, on the 31st of October, the German High Command called a temporary halt to the offensive. This desperate pause granted by the heavens was the miracle the Soviets needed. Stalin, displaying the ruthless energy that defined his rule, used the time to summon his nation's hidden reserves. From the farthest reaches of Siberia in the Far East, divisions of hardened, winter-acclimatized troops began a 1,000-mile journey westward. These were men who viewed snow not as an obstacle, but as their natural environment. Simultaneously, from evacuated factories, now safely behind the Ural Mountains, a stream of new T-34 tanks, arguably the best tank of the war, began to arrive at the front. As the temperature plummeted, the mud froze into iron-hard, rutted ground. The German offensive could resume. On November 15th, the Panzers lurched forward once more. The plan was to encircle Moscow, squeezing it into submission. The 3rd and 4th Panzer armies would strike from the north, while the 2nd Panzer Group would attack from the south, trapping the capital in a final decisive pincer. Music, but now the Germans faced their second great enemy, General Winter. The temperatures plunged to levels their meteorologists had deemed impossible for November. 20, then 30, then 40 degrees below zero. For the German soldiers, still clad in their light summer uniforms, it was a vision of hell. Frostbite became as great a threat as enemy bullets. Weapons seized up, the metal so cold it would tear the skin from a soldier's hands. Tank engines refused to start without being constantly warmed by open fires. The Soviets, clad in their warm white winter coats and felt boots, were in their element. They met the freezing, exhausted Germans with ferocious resistance. For 2 agonizing weeks, the German armies clawed their way forward, fighting for every village, every frozen river, every patch of woods. In the south, the 2nd Panzer Group wasbled white and stopped cold before the city of Tula. In the north, the 4th Panzer Group, in one last superhuman effort, managed to push across the frozen Moscow-Volga Canal. Small units of the 7th Panzer Division were now just 22 mi from Red Square, but they were spent, a shadow of the force that had begun the invasion. They could go no further. Near the small factory town of Kim, just 18 min from the Kremlin, the German offensive reached its absolute limit. A persistent legend arose that a small German patrol saw the golden spires of the Kremlin through their binoculars. It's a powerful myth, but almost certainly untrue. The camouflage city would have been invisible. What the freezing soldiers likely saw was a cruel mirage. The low winter sun glinting off frosted rooftops. This was the high watermark of the Third Reich. The small, isolated group of German troops in Kimi waited for reinforcements that would never come. On December 3rd, they were unceremoniously pushed out by a hastily assembled force of local militia and a few tanks. Today, the spot is marked by a simple, stark memorial of giant anti-tank obstacles. On December 5, 1941, the German offensive against Moscow officially stalled and died. The storm of Operation Typhoon had blown itself out. Then across the entire front, the Red Army, which the world had written off for dead, unleashed a massive, unexpected counteroffensive. 100 new divisions, including the elite Siberian ski troops, slammed into the freezing, exhausted German lines. For the German soldiers, it was a nightmare. The hunters had become the hunted. By the time the Soviet offensive halted in January of 1942, the Germans had been hurled back in some places over 150 mastitumi from the gates of Moscow. The threat to the capital was over. The battle had cost the two sides a combined total of over 2 million casualties, a staggering toll of human suffering. The myth of German invincibility lay shattered, frozen in the endless Russian snow. The epic struggle for the soul of the Soviet Union was far from over, but its turning point had been reached. The long, bloody road to Berlin had begun. The Battle of Moscow was more than a single engagement. It was an epic turning point for in mud, snow, and unimaginable sacrifice. It's a testament to the brutal realities of the Eastern Front, a hidden history often overshadowed by other events of the war. If you believe these pivotal stories deserve to be told, and you want to join us on our next journey into the dark and defining chapters of the past, be sure to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. Your support helps us continue to uncover the history that shaped our world.